The first thing I noticed that Saturday morning was the sound of minivan doors sliding open on the gravel road that runs along the east side of my property. Not one minivan, not two. I counted 7 vehicles parked along the shoulder by 8:15 a.m., and more were pulling in behind them. I was standing on my front porch with a cup of coffee that had already gone cold in my hand, watching families unload strollers, toddlers, and printed wristbands the color of pumpkin spice. The wristbands were neon orange. I could see the HOA logo printed on them from 50 yards away. I set my coffee down on the porch railing, pulled on my boots, and walked toward the hay maze. My hay maze, the one I had built by hand over 3 weekends in September for my grandson Leo, and the few farm visitors who came by for pumpkins and cider. The maze was not large, maybe 40 feet by 60 feet, constructed from square bales of oat hay I had baled myself, arranged in a simple spiral pattern with a small clearing in the center, where I had placed a wooden bench my father built in 1987. The bench had my mother's initials carved into the armrest. I had not advertised the maze. I had not sold tickets. I had not invited the HOA. But there she was, Karen Whitmore, HOA president of the Willow Creek Estates subdivision that bordered the southern edge of my farm. She was standing at the entrance to my hay maze with a folding table, a cash box, a stack of orange wristbands, and a laminated sign that read, Willow Creek Fall Festival, Hay Maze Admission, $8 per person. Behind her, 2 vendor tents had already been set up in my field. One was selling kettle corn. The other was selling apple cider donuts. Both had generators running. Both had extension cords snaking across my grass. Both had lines of people waiting with cash in their hands. I stopped walking about 20 feet from the table. Karen saw me and smiled the kind of smile that is not meant to be friendly. It was the smile of someone who believes they have already won. "Good morning, Mr. Callahan," she said. "We were wondering when you would come down. The festival committee appreciates your cooperation." I did not answer right away. I looked at the maze. I looked at the vendors. I looked at the families. I looked at the orange wristbands. Then I looked back at Karen. "What festival committee?" I said. My voice was calm. I made sure it was calm. Karen's smile did not waver. She tapped the laminated sign with one manicured fingernail. "The Willow Creek Fall Festival, the board voted last month to expand the community event, to include neighboring properties that enhance the seasonal experience. Your hay maze was identified as a perfect centerpiece. We sent a notice." I did not receive a notice. It was mailed on September 15th. "I did not receive a notice," I said again, "because I am not a member of your HOA. My farm is not in your subdivision. My property line begins where your development ends. You have no authority to send me notices." Karen's smile tightened at the corners. She was a woman in her mid-50s, dressed in a cream-colored sweater, dark jeans, and ankle boots that were not designed for walking through hayfields. She had a clipboard in her left hand and a pen tucked behind her ear. Her hair was styled in a way that suggested she spent more time in board meetings than outdoors. She looked at me the way someone looks at a slow-moving employee. "Mr. Callahan, the festival is already underway. Families have purchased tickets. Vendors have paid fees. The HOA has invested significant resources into this event. I understand you may feel territorial, but this is a community celebration. Surely you do not want to ruin a fall festival for all these children." She gestured toward the families. A few parents were watching us now. A toddler in a stroller was crying. The kettle corn vendor was pouring sugar into his machine. The smell of caramelized sugar and diesel exhaust mixed in the cool October air. I looked at the maze again. I could see footprints in the hay where people had already walked through. I could see a juice box spilled near the entrance. I could see a section of the outer wall that had been pushed inward, probably by a child climbing where they should not have been climbing. The hay bales were not decorative. They were feed hay. I had planned to use them for my cattle in November. Now they were being trampled by strangers wearing orange wristbands. I turned back to Karen. "You need to shut this down," I said. "Now." Karen laughed. It was a short, practiced laugh, the kind that is meant to signal that the other person is being unreasonable. "I do not think so. The festival runs until 4 o'clock. If you have concerns, you can submit them in writing to the HOA board. We meet on the second Tuesday of every month." She turned away from me and began speaking to a family that had just arrived. "Welcome to the Willow Creek Fall Festival. Hay maze admission is $8 per person. Children under 3 are free. Wristbands must be worn at all times inside the maze." I stood there for a long moment. I could feel my heart beating in my chest, but I kept my breathing steady. I have learned over the years that anger is a tool, not a weapon. You do not swing it. You place it carefully. I walked back to my house. I did not argue. I did not shout. I did not call the sheriff. Not yet. I went inside, sat down at my kitchen table, and opened my laptop. The first thing I did was pull up the property survey I had commissioned in 2019 when I purchased the farm. The survey was clear. My parcel, designated as Parcel 14-7B-22 in the county records, comprised 47 acres of agricultural land, with no HOA covenants, no shared access agreements, and no community use designations. The hay maze sat approximately 300 feet inside my property line, clearly visible from the road, but entirely on private land. The second thing I did was pull up my farm insurance policy. I am a careful man. My father taught me that a farmer's two most important tools are his word and his paperwork. I had a comprehensive farm liability policy through Midwestern Agricultural Mutual, covering livestock operations, equipment storage, and limited agritourism activities. The agritourism rider specifically covered pumpkin picking, hay rack rides, and a small corn maze I had operated in 2021. It did not cover public festivals. It did not cover third-party vendors. It did not cover events organized by homeowners associations. It did not cover ticket sales. The third thing I did was call my insurance agent. His name is Dale Morrison. He has been my agent for 14 years. He knows my operation. He knows my property. He knows my policy. He answered on the second ring. Dale, it's Frank Callahan. Frank, what can I do for you? I have a situation. The HOA from the subdivision next door has set up a fall festival on my property, without my permission. They are selling tickets to my hay maze. They have vendors operating in my field. I need to know what happens if someone gets hurt. There was a pause on the other end of the line. I could hear Dale typing. Frank, are you telling me there is a public event happening on your farm right now? Yes. With paid admission? Yes. And vendors? Yes. And you did not authorize it? No. Dale exhaled slowly. I have known him long enough to recognize that exhale. It was the sound of an insurance agent, realizing he was about to earn his commission. Frank, listen to me carefully. Your policy has a commercial exclusion for unapproved public gatherings. If someone gets injured in that maze, if a vendor's generator starts a fire, if a child has an allergic reaction to the kettle corn, if anyone so much as twists an ankle on a hay bale, your policy will not cover it. You will be personally liable. The HOA's event insurance might cover some of it, but only if the event is on HOA property. If the event is on your land, their policy will argue that the liability falls on you, and your policy will argue that the event was unauthorized and therefore excluded. You are standing in a coverage gap the size of a barn. I let that sink in. So if something happens right now, I am exposed, completely exposed. And the HOA is exposed too, because they are selling tickets on property they do not own and do not have permission to use. If their board has any sense, they will shut this down immediately. If they do not, and something goes wrong, the lawsuits will be catastrophic. For them, for you, for everyone. I thanked Dale and hung up. Then I made one more call. This one was to the county event inspector. Her name is Patricia Ng. I had met her once before, when I applied for a temporary event permit for the corn maze in 2021. She is a small woman with a sharp memory and a low tolerance for paperwork errors. She answered on the fourth ring. County permits and inspections. This is Patricia. Patricia, this is Frank Callahan out on Route 14. I have a question about event permits. Frank, good to hear from you. What is the event? That is the question. There is a fall festival happening on my farm right now. I did not organize it. I did not apply for a permit. The HOA from Willow Creek Estates set it up without my knowledge. They are selling tickets. They have food vendors. I am trying to figure out if any county permits were filed. Patricia was quiet for a moment. I could hear her keyboard clicking. Frank, I am looking at the permit database right now. There is no event permit on file for your parcel. There is no temporary food service permit. There is no public assembly permit. There is no vendor license for any commercial activity on Parcel 14-7B22. If what you are telling me is accurate, the HOA is operating an unpermitted public event on private agricultural land. That is a violation of County Code Section 8-214. The fines start at $500 per violation and can go up to $5,000 if commercial activity is involved. How many violations would you say are happening right now? Another pause. More keyboard clicking. If they have food vendors without health permits, that is one per vendor. If they are charging admission without a temporary business license, that is another. If they are using generators without an electrical inspection, that is another. If they have more than 50 people assembled without a public gathering permit, that is another. Frank, I am counting at least 6 separate violations, and I have not even left my desk. Patricia, would you be willing to come out here and take a look? I can be there in 40 minutes. I hung up the phone and walked back outside. The festival had grown in the 20 minutes I had been inside. There were now at least 60 people on my property. The kettle corn line was longer. The donut vendor had sold out of one flavor and was apologizing to customers. A group of teenagers were taking selfies on top of my hay bales. A woman was changing a diaper on the bench my father built. Karen was still at the folding table, collecting cash and handing out wristbands. She had a volunteer with her now, a younger woman wearing a Willow Creek HOA volunteer badge. The volunteer was counting money and writing numbers in a ledger. I walked up to the table again. Karen saw me coming, and her expression shifted from customer service pleasant to board meeting stern. Mr. Callahan, I thought I made myself clear. The festival is proceeding as planned. If you have a complaint, you can submit it in writing. I have a question, I said. Does the HOA have event insurance that covers activities on private farmland outside the subdivision boundaries? Karen blinked. It was a small blink, but I saw it. The HOA's insurance is comprehensive. It covers all board-sanctioned community events. Does it cover events on property the HOA does not own? The board reviewed the liability framework before approving the festival. That is not what I asked. Does the policy specifically cover third-party property where the owner has not signed a use agreement? Karen's volunteer looked up from the ledger. Her name tag said Megan. She looked at Karen, then at me, then back at Karen. Karen's smile had completely disappeared now. Mr. Callahan, I am not going to discuss insurance technicalities with you in the middle of a community event. If you have concerns, you can contact the HOA's attorney. I already contacted my insurance agent, I said. He informed me that my farm policy does not cover unauthorized public events, which means if anyone gets hurt here today, my insurance will not pay. And if your HOA's insurance discovers that the event is on private property without a use agreement, their coverage will likely be denied as well, which means you are personally liable, as the event organizer, as the person collecting money, as the person who made the decision to set up on my land. Megan's face had gone pale. She set down the ledger. Karen, is that true? Karen did not look at her. She was staring at me with an expression I can only describe as controlled fury. You are trying to intimidate me. I am trying to inform you, there is a difference. This is harassment. This is my property. We stood there for a long moment. The sounds of the festival continued around us. Children laughing, the kettle corn machine popping, a generator humming, someone's phone playing music, and underneath all of it, the quiet rustle of October wind moving through the hay bales. Then I heard a car door close near the road. I turned and saw Patricia Ng walking toward us. She was carrying a clipboard and wearing a county inspector badge on a lanyard around her neck. She had a camera in her other hand. Karen saw her too. Who is that? That is the county event inspector. I called her to check on the permits for today's festival. Karen's face went through several expressions in quick succession. Confusion, disbelief, anger, and then something that looked almost like fear. You called the county. You are operating an unpermitted public event on private agricultural land. That is a violation of County Code Section 8-214. The fines start at $500 per violation. I count at least 6 violations. Patricia will probably count more. Patricia reached the table. She looked at the cash box. She looked at the laminated sign. She looked at the vendor tents. She looked at the orange wristbands. Then she looked at Karen. Ma'am, are you the event organizer? Karen straightened her sweater. I am the president of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association. This is a community fall festival. Do you have a county event permit? The HOA does not require county permits for community events on association property. This is not association property, Patricia said. This is parcel 14-7B-22, which is privately owned agricultural land. The owner is Mr. Frank Callahan. I have confirmed that no event permit, no food service permit, no public assembly permit, and no temporary business license has been issued for this location. Are you charging admission? Karen did not answer. Megan, the volunteer, looked at the cash box and then at Karen and then at Patricia. Yes, Megan said quietly. $8 per person. Patricia wrote something on her clipboard. And are the food vendors selling products? Yes. Do they have county health permits for this location? Megan looked at Karen again. Karen's jaw was tight. She did not speak. I do not know, Megan said. I am just a volunteer. Patricia nodded and walked toward the vendor tents. I stayed by the table. Karen turned to me. Her voice was low now, stripped of the polished board meeting tone. You are going to regret this. I doubt that. The HOA has resources. We have attorneys. We have influence in this county. You have a cash box full of ticket money from an unpermitted event on private property. You have vendors operating without health permits. You have 60 people standing on land that is not insured for public gatherings. And you have a county inspector documenting every violation. I do not think your resources are going to help you today. Karen's hands were shaking slightly. She gripped her clipboard tighter. This maze was visible from the road. It was clearly intended for public use. It was intended for my grandson. He is 4 years old. He likes tractors and hay bales, and the bench my father built. He was supposed to come out here this afternoon and walk through the maze with me. Now the hay is trampled. The bench has a diaper on it, and strangers are taking selfies on my feed bales. You did not ask permission. You did not send a notice. You saw something you wanted, and you took it because you thought you could. Karen opened her mouth to respond, but before she could speak, Patricia returned from the vendor tents. Her expression was grim. Mr. Callahan, I have documented 6 county code violations. The food vendors are operating without health permits. The generators have not been inspected. The assembly exceeds 50 persons without a permit. The admission charges constitute commercial activity without a business license. The event is on private property without owner consent. And the HOA has not filed a temporary use application. I am issuing a cease and desist order effective immediately. The festival must shut down. All attendees must vacate the property. The vendors must remove their equipment. The HOA will be receiving citations for each violation. Karen's face had gone white. You cannot shut down the festival. Families have paid. Vendors have invested. The HOA has already spent. Ma'am, I am not asking. I am ordering. If the festival is not shut down within 30 minutes, I will contact the sheriff's department and request enforcement. The fines will increase. The citations will multiply, and the county attorney will be notified. Patricia handed Karen a piece of paper. It was a formal cease and desist order with the county seal at the top. Karen stared at it like it was written in a language she did not understand. Megan had already started packing up the cash box. The kettle corn vendor had noticed something was wrong and was walking toward us with a worried expression. The donut vendor was on his phone, probably calling someone. The families were still wandering through the maze, unaware that the festival was collapsing around them. I walked over to the entrance of the hay maze and raised my voice just enough to carry. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Frank Callahan. This is my farm. The festival has been shut down by the county due to permit violations. I need everyone to please exit the maze and return to your vehicles. I apologize for the inconvenience. The HOA will be issuing refunds. There was a moment of silence. Then the murmuring started. Parents looked at each other. Children asked what was happening. A man near the back of the maze shouted, "Are you serious?" "I am serious. The county inspector is here. The event is not permitted. Please exit the maze." People began filing out. Some looked confused. Some looked angry. A few looked embarrassed, as if they had suspected something was not quite right about a hay maze in the middle of a farm with no signage and no obvious connection to the subdivision down the road. Karen was still standing at the folding table, holding the cease and desist order. Her volunteer had disappeared. The vendors were already breaking down their tents. Patricia was taking photographs of the generator setups and the food preparation areas. I walked back to Karen. "You need to refund the tickets." She looked at me. Her eyes were wet, but her expression was still hard. "The HOA will handle the refunds." "Good. You will also need to pay for the damaged hay. Those bales were feed hay. They are worth about $40 each, and at least 15 of them are damaged beyond use. That is $600. You will also need to pay for the cleanup. There are juice boxes, diaper wipes, and candy wrappers all over my field. And you will need to pay for the bench repair. The armrest is scratched where someone set a stroller on it. You cannot be serious." "I am completely serious. I will send an itemized invoice to the HOA board." If it is not paid within 30 days, I will file a claim in small claims court. I have photographs of everything. I have the county inspector's documentation. I have a recorded statement from my insurance agent confirming the liability exposure you created. You do not want this to go to court." Karen did not respond. She folded the cease and desist order, tucked it under her clipboard, and walked toward her car. It was a white Lexus SUV with a Willow Creek HOA board member parking placard on the dashboard. She got in, started the engine, and drove away without looking back. The festival took about an hour to fully dismantle. The vendors packed their equipment. The families drove away. Patricia finished her documentation and handed me a copy of her report. "Frank, I am sorry this happened. The county will be following up with the HOA. The fines will be significant. Thank you, Patricia. You handled this better than most people would have. I have learned that yelling does not fix anything. Paperwork fixes things." She smiled slightly and walked back to her car. By noon, my field was empty. The folding table was still there, abandoned. The laminated sign was still taped to it. The cash box was gone, taken by Megan or Karen or someone. The hay maze was a wreck. Bales were pushed out of alignment. Footprints had worn paths through the hay. The bench had a scratch on the armrest that cut through my mother's initials. I stood there for a long time looking at the damage. Then I walked back to my house, made a fresh pot of coffee, and sat down at my kitchen table. I opened a new folder on my laptop. I labeled it Willow Creek HOA, Fall Festival Incident. I uploaded the photographs I had taken. I saved the county inspector's report. I wrote a summary of my conversation with Dale Morrison. I drafted the invoice for damaged hay, cleanup, and bench repair. The total came to $1,240. I printed 2 copies, one for my records, one for the HOA board. Then I called my grandson Leo's mother, my daughter-in-law Sarah, and told her what had happened. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Leo was so excited about the maze. I know. I will rebuild it, better than before. And this time, I will put up a fence. A fence, and a sign, and maybe a camera." She laughed softly. "Dad, you are something else. I am just a farmer who does not like people touching his hay." That afternoon, I drove into town and bought 4 metal fence posts, a roll of wire fencing, and a private property, no trespassing sign. I spent the rest of the day installing the fence along the road frontage. It was not a tall fence, just enough to make the boundary clear, just enough to make the next person think twice before setting up a folding table on my land. The following Monday, I attended the Willow Creek HOA board meeting. I had not been invited, but I had checked the meeting schedule on their website. It was held in the community clubhouse, a beige building with vinyl siding and a flagpole out front. There were about 30 residents in attendance. Karen was sitting at the front of the room behind a long table with 4 other board members. She saw me walk in and her face tightened. I took a seat in the back row. The meeting proceeded through the usual agenda items: pool maintenance, landscaping contracts, a dispute about fence heights. Then Karen reached the item labeled Fall Festival Report. She cleared her throat. "As many of you know, the Fall Festival was held this past Saturday. Unfortunately, due to a misunderstanding with a neighboring property owner, the event was cut short. The board is currently reviewing the situation and will provide a full update at the next meeting." A man in the front row raised his hand. "I heard the county shut it down. I heard there were fines." Karen's smile was strained. "The county did raise some permitting questions. We are addressing those with our legal counsel." "I heard the festival was on private property without permission," another resident said. "Is that true?" Before Karen could answer, I stood up. "Excuse me. My name is Frank Callahan. I own the farm next door. The hay maze that was used for the festival is on my property. I did not give permission for the event. I was not notified. I discovered the festival when families started arriving on my land. The county shut it down because no permits had been filed. The HOA sold tickets to an event on private property without the owner's consent. That is not a misunderstanding. That is trespassing." The room went silent. Every face turned toward me. Then every face turned toward Karen. Karen's expression was frozen. One of the other board members, a man with gray hair and glasses, leaned toward his microphone. "Mr. Callahan, we were not aware that the maze was on private property. The festival committee assured the board that all necessary permissions had been obtained." "The festival committee was chaired by Karen Whitmore," I said. "She knew the maze was on my property. She told me herself that the board had voted to include neighboring properties. She told me the notice had been mailed. She told me the festival was proceeding regardless of my objections. She collected money, she brought vendors, she ignored me when I asked her to shut it down. The gray-haired man turned to Karen. Karen, is this true? Karen's voice was tight. The maze was visible from the road. It was clearly intended for community use. The board voted to include it in the festival. I believed we had implied consent. Implied consent is not a legal standard, I said. Trespassing is. Unauthorized commercial use of private property is. Creating a liability exposure for a property owner without their knowledge is. The county has already issued citations. My insurance agent has confirmed that your event created a coverage gap that could have resulted in catastrophic liability for both me and the HOA. I have prepared an invoice for the damages to my property. I am submitting it to the board tonight. I walked to the front of the room and handed the invoice to the gray-haired man. He looked at it. His expression shifted from concern to something closer to alarm. $1,240. That covers damaged hay, cleanup, and repair to a family heirloom that was damaged during the event. It does not include compensation for the unauthorized use of my land. I am willing to waive that if the invoice is paid promptly, and the board provides a written assurance that no future events will be held on my property without my explicit written consent. The gray-haired man looked at Karen. Karen was staring at the table. Her clipboard was in front of her, but she was not writing anything. Her pen was still tucked behind her ear. She looked smaller than she had on Saturday, smaller and quieter, and very, very alone. The board will review this, the gray-haired man said. Mr. Callahan, I want to apologize on behalf of the association. This should not have happened. We will make it right. I appreciate that. I turned and walked out of the clubhouse. The night air was cool and clean. I could hear the wind moving through the trees that lined the subdivision entrance. I got in my truck and drove home. The fence posts were visible in my headlights as I pulled into the driveway. The private property sign was straight and level. The hay maze was still standing, damaged but not destroyed. I would fix it this weekend. Leo was coming over on Sunday. We would walk through the maze together. We would sit on the bench. I would tell him about his great-grandmother, whose initials were carved into the armrest. And maybe I would tell him about the weekend the HOA tried to steal the maze. Maybe I would tell him about the insurance agent and the county inspector and the board meeting. Maybe I would tell him that some people think authority comes from being loud. But real ownership is quieter than that. A clipboard is not a deed. A sign is not a survey. A threat is not a title. And silence is not surrender. It is preparation. The following week, I received a check from the Willow Creek HOA for $1,040. The memo line said Fall Festival damages. A week after that, I received a letter from the HOA board secretary. It was a formal written assurance that no future HOA events would be held on my property without my explicit written consent. The letter was signed by the gray-haired man. His name was Robert Chen. He was the new HOA president. Karen Whitmore had resigned. I heard from a neighbor that she had moved out of the subdivision a few months later. I do not know where she went. I do not particularly care. The hay maze is still there. I rebuilt it the weekend after the festival. I added a second spiral. I reinforced the walls with stakes. I put a small sign at the entrance that says, Callahan Farm, private property, family, and invited guests only. Leo came over on Sunday. He ran through the maze 3 times. He sat on the bench and traced the initials with his finger. He asked me if the letters meant something. I told him they meant someone was here before us, someone who mattered, someone who built things with their hands and left their mark. He nodded like he understood, even though he is only 4. Then he asked if we could get ice cream. I said yes. We drove into town. We got cones. We sat on the tailgate of my truck and watched the sun go down over the fields. And I thought about the folder on my laptop, the one labeled Willow Creek HOA, Fall Festival Incident. I had not deleted it. I would not delete it. It was a reminder, not of what I had lost, but of what I had protected. Some people think authority comes from being loud. Real ownership is quieter than that. It is a deed in a safe deposit box. It is a survey in a file cabinet. It is an insurance policy in a folder. It is a fence along a road. It is a sign that says private property. It is a grandfather sitting on a bench his father built, watching his grandson run through a hay maze, knowing that some things are worth protecting, not with anger, not with threats, but with patience and paperwork, and the quiet certainty that comes from knowing exactly where your property line is and exactly who has the right to cross it.